Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's wonderful lecture. We're so glad to have a wonderful archaeologist who's going to be speaking to us today, Dr. Cheryl Janifer LaRoche. But before we get into today's fascinating program and really important discussion of the life and legacy of Harriet Tubman in this, what would be her bicentennial year, is a little bit of housekeeping. We love to use this Zoom webinar platform to engage with you, our wonderful audience, as we're still limited in how we can get together in person here on Capitol Hill. If you have any content questions for the wonderful Dr. LaRoche, you can submit those to Jane through the Q&A section of the webinar platform. If you have any troubleshooting questions, if you feel like you're having some difficulties with the audio visual, or if you feel like you're having difficulties with the Zoom platform, you can put those questions to me in the chat section. So once again, any content-based questions for Dr. LaRoche can go to the Q&A section. Any troubleshooting questions can go to the chat section. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce the President and CEO of the U.S. Capitol Historical Society, Jane Campbell, to introduce Dr. LaRoche and start today's program. Jane?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you for your work pulling these webinars together. This is really a great joy as we start Black History Month, really honoring the work of Harriet Tubman. And today's scholar is extremely special. This is our first ever archaeologist. Archaeologist Dr. Cheryl Janifer LaRoche is an associate research professor in historic preservation at the University of Maryland, College Park. She has researched and mapped African-American history and Underground Railroad sites for more than 20 years. She participated in the Harriet Tubman, A Woman of Courage and Vision program for the National Archives that was done to celebrate the opening of the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Visitor Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or Maryland. And I will tell you, I had the privilege of going there not long ago. And if you haven't been, definitely go. It is a very meaningful experience. Dr. LaRoche participated in the Tubman National Monument Scholars Roundtable, served as the lead author and cultural landscape consultant for the Harriet Tubman Special Resources Study, and has been a go-to person for the National Park Service, for the Smithsonian, on numerous projects. One of her marquee pieces of scholarship is that there was resistance in the Black community, in the African-American community of enslaved people. And she tells that story in her first book, Free Black Communities and the Underground Railroad, The Geography of Resistance. She wrote this book with the vision to make sure that we didn't just see the fight against slavery as a group of white abolitionists helping a group of enslaved people who were completely dependent, because in fact, it was the Black community itself that was organizing that resistance. So we are so honored to have you with us today, and tell us about Harriet Tubman, Dr. LaRoche.
Oh, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for having me here today. I'm going to share my screen, and let's see. All right. So good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here with you. I want to dedicate this talk to the memory of John Crichton. He was a great scholar and really took us all, anybody who knew about Tubman, he took us through and talked us through her life. As you know, Harriet Tubman was born on the eastern shore of Maryland. Let's see here. If I can get this to advance. There we go. She was born on the eastern shore of Maryland. And if you look at this landscape, you know that this is the landscape that we're looking at. She is born in March of 1822. I think scholars have decided on that, We know from an archaeological perspective that the state of Maryland, the archaeologists have just found their father's cabin, Ben Ross's cabin, where we believe Harriet Tubman was born. So that's a great find. She grows up on the Eastern Shore. She is at a very young age. She's being hired out. She is working very hard. She's being abused at times. And when she is a teenager, she comes to this place. This is a Bucktown store. And if you go down on the Eastern Shore, this place still actually stands. It's a Greenbrier and Bucktown Road. And she comes into this place and when she's about 15, and there's a man who has left the field. He's enslaved and is being chased by the slaveholder and is about to get captured when the slaveholder starts to throw a weight at the fellow. And Tubman steps in front of him and intercepts this weight, and she's subsequently struck in the head. This injury, this weight in her head crushes her skull, gives her what we would now call a traumatic brain injury, which she lives with for the rest of her life, and the consequences of that for the rest of her life. We know that in 1849, she makes the really seminal decision to escape slavery. And these are the two ads that we see that were posted for her and for her brothers, Harry and Ben. You see here that, she's called Minty. And when she is 27 years old, her name is Araminta Ross at this point. She leaves with her brothers, but after about 2 weeks, her brothers force her to go back. They force her to come back into slavery. At that point, I believe Tubman learned one of her first and most valuable lessons about slavery and about people, that if you lose your courage and you don't have anybody there to bolster it, her brothers made her come back. When she escaped by herself, she used to bring a pistol with her when she had other people, because she knew that if someone lost their courage and came back into slavery, they're probably going to not have any more courage to talk to the slaveholder and probably would betray her. The first time, she escapes actually 3 times in my counting. The first time she's 7, when she's being abused by a woman, a slaveholding woman, and she runs away. It's only from 5 days. She stays out. She falls into a pig pen and she hides out. But it is a mark of who she's going to become. She then leaves with her brothers, and then we're not exactly sure how much after that she escapes alone and enters into the network of the Underground Railroad. We know that she leaves and comes in, and the map on the left is all through Maryland and Delaware and up through Newcastle, all the places where we know that she leaves down in this part of the country. But she also comes all the way up into Albany. She comes up, if you see Troy, New York over here, she is also coming up and across into Rochester, as you can see. She's coming into Buffalo, and then she's coming into St. Catharines. She comes into Canada because after 1850, there's no place in the United States that's safe for her. We know that she crosses a suspension bridge, that's how you get from the United States into Canada. And we know that the Niagara Falls is there. And so that this is the landscape she's moving into. She stays up in St. Catharines from 1851 to about 1858. And this is the church that she attended in St. Catharines. This is the British Methodist Episcopal Church. And if you look right down on the side in the shadows, we see a very small display, and it's talking about Harriet Tubman. And so when you're following her path, when you're following her into her various routes, you can see that there are small little commemorative markings along the way. She finds Canada a refuge, but she also comes back. She comes back into the United States, and she stays there until 1858, but she comes back into the United States, and she is helping people escape. Her family, she's bringing 70 people out over about 13 trips. And we know that generally she's very well prepared for the unexpected, and that she possesses this maddening ability to frustrate her would-be captors and the pursuers. And she's anticipating, she's governing herself, and she's following, she understands the people who are in pursuit of her very well. She may not be able to read and write, but she reads people and she reads the land, both like they were textbooks. And those abilities really keep her safe, they keep her and make her very effective. And she works this way for all of her life throughout all the different episodes that I'm going to tell you about. When she goes up to Troy, where I showed you on the map, she pulls off this dramatic rescue of Charles Nally, and she pulls him out from the U.S. Marshals and disguises herself as an old woman and really rescues him 2 times, not once, but twice. One of the things we can say about Tubman is that she disguises herself. She knows how to be inconspicuous. She knows how to, she really knows how to move among the slaveholders. She knows what to do. This is a picture from the frontispiece of one of the books by Bradford called Scenes in the Life. And we say that we look at this and we know that she's dressed for battle. These are her Civil War years. You see the tents in the background. And shortly after Lincoln starts to have his call to arms and really starts to look at emancipation, Tubman realizes that joining the forces, the federal forces in the military, is a way to increase her effectiveness. She may have brought 70 people out of slavery while she was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, but now is a chance to liberate her people. And she wages her own very personal, quiet war, but a very public and effective war against slavery in these years. She says that the good Lord has come down to deliver my people, and I have to go and help him. And she did, and helped scores of people come out of slavery. First, she goes to Fort Monroe, which is in Hampton Roads, Virginia, where she acts as a nurse, and she helps the newly freed captives who are coming out of slavery. They're sick. There are numerous problems. We know that while we call Tubman a nurse, she's really a healer. She knows effective roots. She has distilled these roots and she boils them and works on, can cure dysentery, or she can abate dysentery. And so she's very highly sought after as a nurse. She moves through the Civil War years. And in November of 1862, she comes down into South Carolina. So she's in South Carolina. She's working with Higginson. She's working with the 1st and 2nd South Carolina. And she also goes down into Florida. She goes down to Jacksonville, Florida. And it's there in Jacksonville that she is on a campaign with Montgomery. And she and Montgomery start to work out the details of what is going to become their signature action. Harriet Tubman has been empowered. She has now spies working with her, about 9 men, and she has been penetrating the interior. And many of the people that are working with her as spies were formerly enslaved. They know the interior, they know the land, they know the maneuverings. And so she's in Jacksonville, and she and Montgomery and the fleet that they are with actually take Jacksonville without ever firing a shot. So this was really a very important accomplishment, and it builds Tubman's reputation. She then is able, she's been up in Boston, and so we know that she has made friends with people in very high places. She goes up into Boston, and when she is there, she's introduced to the governor of Boston, Governor Andrew, and governor of Massachusetts, excuse me, Governor Andrew. And he gives her this carte blanche, basically, safe passage on all government transports. And comes from David Hunter, who signs up, and he is the commander of the Department of the South at the time. So Hunter really does tell Harriet Tubman that yes, he's behind her, yes, he's going to support her. And we really now see that Tubman is moving into her Civil War years. You know, the Secretary of War Stanton knows about her work and is definitely receiving information from her. And he's talking and going back and talking about the reliable sources that he has. And he's basically talking about Tubman and her spies when they are saying that we have on the basis of these reliable sources that the information is sound and that we should be able to expect and capture towns like Jacksonville, which they did. Her intelligence was critical. And the combination of her intelligence and Montgomery's bravado really starts to help them carry out some very extensive guerrilla operations. In March of 1863, we know that Tubman is joined in with the 1st and 2nd Carolina, and you know when she moves down and around Jacksonville, and then she and Montgomery finally realize that they have worked out sort of this plan for how things are going to work. We know that after January 1st, 1863, Lincoln actually authorizes the United States colored troops, and we start to see this is the 29th South Carolina down in Beaufort at the time. So we see that all of these things are coming together. But what I will say, and this looks just like the Eastern Shore, but this is actually what it looks like in South Carolina. This is the Kumbi River. We know that Tubman comes together with Montgomery and with David Hunter, and they begin to formulate a plan to capture and destroy many of the plantations that are down in South Carolina. She's given this authority to infiltrate the interior, and we know that she has 9 men directly under her command. Several of them are trusted water pilots, and they can travel up the river by boat. They're really undetected, and so they're very well positioned to do all of this. The Kumbi River Basin is in Beaufort County in South Carolina, and this is near where we know that she's going to begin this really amazing raid. Her biographer, Catherine Clinton, says that her sneak attack in the dead of night to catch slaveholders off guard in their own backyard was just vintage Tubman. This is a map of what it looks like. And so you see in here that you have the St. Helena Sound, and the Kumbi River runs up into here, and we see all of these waterways. This is some of the most fertile, lush, important land in the Low Country. Some of the richest land, some of the richest planters, some of the richest rice producing plantations are in this region along these tidal rivers that fan inland from the Atlantic Ocean. And it also has some of the largest population of enslaved workers. So the federal commanders wanted to move up the river. They wanted to destroy these plantations, and they wanted to liberate these enslaved workers because they really needed to recruit people for these Black regiments. So as they move up, this is not one of the boats that Tubman was on, it's just representative. So there are 3 boats that come together. They convert these civilian boats and use them as gunboats. One of them, the Sentinel, goes aground very quickly. And so there are 2 boats that make their way up the Kumbi River. These are, these side wheel paddle steamers, and that are being used as gunboats and for part of the attack on the Kumbi River. So you see here, they begin around Tar Bluffs, and they're going to work their way all the way up this river. They're going to go up, they're going to burn the plantations that are here, and they're going to come up into the Kumbi Ferry. There's a bridge there that they want to destroy and that they want to work on. And so all of this is this bold raid up. The Confederates are there, but they've left their gun posts, they've left their positions. And so they are, because Tubman has sent her spies out, they know what to expect. Many of these rivers, and this is true for the Kumbi River, are mined, and there are a number of, there's barbed wire, there's torpedoes, and all of the 2 ships have to navigate and negotiate their way up the river. So you have your gun posts there for the Confederates, you have your torpedoes in the water, you have all of these things that are set up for destruction, and they need to come around them. But as they come up the river, and they're coming alongside these plantations, what you see is, this is from a report afterward, you see the burning of the plantations here in the background. You see the two boats. One is the Harriet Weed and the other is the John Adams. We know that Tubman is on board the lead boat with James Montgomery. And we know that David Hunter, who is on the second boat, is there commanding the gun posts and really holding down the artillery and making sure and giving them cover. They destroy one of the bridges there. And when they come back into all these plantations, they sound the horn and they let people know that the liberators are here. So there are about 300 men with the second South Carolina, and they are the liberating force. So what these people who are held in slavery see are these Black troops, these US colored troops, Harriet Tubman, coming as their liberators. And you see down in the corner, people left in droves. So where Tubman had been able to rescue maybe 70 people on foot over the years that she was an Underground Railroad operator, she now rescues 750 people. This was a major undertaking. They came back with supplies, horses, livestock, people, all manner of goods and assets from this raid. When the Confederates reported on it, they said the enemy seems to have been well posted as to the character and capacity of our troops and their small chance of encountering opposition, and to have been well guided by persons thoroughly acquainted with the river and the country. The Military Times said later on that the Confederacy discovered overnight what it took the Union's Department of the South over a year to find out. Harriet Tubman was a formative secret weapon whose gifts should never be underestimated. If the Confederacy had known the high compliment they were paying to Tubman at the time, they had no idea. They had no idea that it was her. You know, she was very much underestimated, but we know that her name was kept out of the official military documents. We also know that the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency's website, affirms that the tactical intelligence Tubman provided to Union forces during the war was frequent, abundant, and effectively used in military operations. She even received $100 from the Secret Service. So this is the woman that is really now engaged deeply in the Civil War. Here is Major General David Montgomery. He's commander of the Department of the South. We see Tubman in the center, and we see Colonel James Montgomery of Kansas fame, bleeding Kansas. Montgomery has issued at some point earlier his own sort of Emancipation Proclamation before Lincoln, which he has to rescind. We know Tubman is a freedom fighter. We know Montgomery is a freedom fighter. The three of them pulled together for a very potent raid. In my own professional work, I'm always amazed to see people quibbling over who led the raid. My answer is always this: it was a triumvirate. You would have never had this raid without the authority of David Hunter, without the bravado and the hot dogging kind of outlandishness of James Montgomery, who just burned everything in sight, sort of like Sherman, and Harriet Tubman, who most likely devised this, has her spies, has all of the intelligence, and has the people ready and poised to come when it's time to escape. You have to remember that Harriet Tubman and her small band of scouts and river pilots, she is the first woman to command men in military action during the Civil War. She's the commander of men, she's the commander of missions, and she's a healer. But when the news comes out, what do we have? It comes out and it says that James Montgomery, formerly of Kansas, is the person who is who's leading this raid. There's no mention of Tubman. And she, fortunately, has friends in high places. She goes back to her friends up in Boston, mainly Franklin Sanborn, and Franklin Sanborn writes the definitive article about Tubman. And this tells the world who she is and what she has accomplished in the war. If she wasn't known before for her Underground Railroad work, she now becomes famous for what she brings to the Civil War. Now, we know that one day after the Kumbi River raid, the Massachusetts 54th arrives in South Carolina. And they are going to partake in one of the most famous battles of the war, probably one of the most glorified and publicized battles of the war. And that is at Fort Wagner. Now, they come in June, but the battle at Fort Wagner isn't until July. And Tubman is there with the 54th the night before they go into battle. She says that she feeds Colonel Robert Gould Shaw his last meal, his breakfast. And she gives an eyewitness account of the battle from across Charleston Harbor, where she talks about this carnage and describes drops of blood raining from the sky. What happens in South Carolina is that these Black men who have been undermined, and people say, will they fight? Can they fight? Valor is there. They prove to the world their bravery. They prove to the world their ability to stay and fight to the bitter end. They're fighting for their freedom, and Tubman is there. So we know that she finishes out the Civil War. She comes back for a time because she's ill, and while she's home, the war ends. Tubman comes back to Auburn, New York, which if just like we have a Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Center in Cambridge, Maryland, we also have the Harriet Tubman National Park in Auburn. She comes to Auburn where she settles down. She marries Nelson. I can't remember. So she marries, and then she also works and does a lot of sort of philanthropic work. She's working with women's suffrage. She's working with all these different people in terms of the humanitarian aid that she can provide. So when she is in Auburn, she also begins to apply for a pension. So she first applies for a pension for her work as a Civil War veteran. She starts this application in 1865. And we know that by the end of that 1865, 1870, 1880, she receives very little. She gets maybe $200, but no veteran's pension. In 1890, she becomes eligible for a widow's pension because her husband has died by then. He died in 1888. But finally, in 1898, she gets some small amount of money, and she's allotted a widow's pension of $8 at first. And you'll see on the right where they say they're going to give her $25 in pension a month. Congress goes back and they reduce that, and they give her $20 a month as an increase to her widow's pension, but they never pay her any veterans pension or compensation for her work in the Civil War. So she has a 3 decades battle with the federal pensions before she gets paid. And I have to say that her husband's name was Nelson Davis. I have to say that before she is compensated for this money, this woman is completely tenacious. She stays with this battle for 30 years before she gets paid. But you know, the same kind of tenaciousness that we know she has, the same kinds of ways that we know that she's been able to stay the course throughout her life, we know that she can also stay for herself and fight for her rights and her money. And this pension is what, you know, keeps her afloat after the war, because Tubman runs into money problems constantly. She's generous to a fault. She's always giving things away. She's always helping another person. And we know that as she ages, one of her lifelong dreams was to have a home for the aged. And this is a picture of John Brown Hall, which is no longer in existence. It was an archaeological site, but it burned. But you know, the University of Syracuse has done a great deal of archaeological work and excavations up there to understand this site. So when she was 74, Harriet Tubman buys about 25 acres up in Auburn. And this is where she had hoped to establish the Tubman Home for the Aged and the indigent Negroes, which is what she really wanted to do. You know, people are coming out of these enslaved populations. They have amassed no money because they are not being paid. And so when freedom comes with nothing. And so that people have got to now care for themselves. And when the elderly are forced into this position and they're sick and so forth, this is what her lifelong dream is what she wanted to do. When she ran into financial trouble and couldn't sustain the home, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church took over the operations, and the facility opened in 1908. And when Tubman herself became ill and frail, she became one of the patients who is there. And that John Brown Hall, John Brown was one of her heroes, she names the place after John Brown. This place, as I said, is no longer standing, but when you go up to Auburn, there are other buildings. The second building is standing, and the home that she and Nelson Davis lived in is also standing. So when we look at Harriet Tubman, you know that her name, her is the Moses of her people. And that here's a woman who possessed a vision. She had forethought. She inspired men and women to risk their lives and to trust her with their lives. She guided them, she led them over hundreds of miles of uncertain territory and terrain and in very risky times. Women trusted her with their newborns and men trusted her with their lives. She inspired the most powerful people who were around her, from John Brown to the Transcendentalists, to Thoreau, to Louisa May Alcott's father, to William Lloyd Garrison, to the governor, and to all of the, Mary Todd Lincoln was her friend. We know that Tubman is an extraordinary woman. But I have to say, if we think about what society had intended for her as an enslaved woman, if we think about what society had expected of her as an enslaved woman, Tubman would not have been able to accomplish any of the things that she has accomplished. She was, yes, a nurse, but she was also a healer. Yes, she was a spy, but she was a leader of men. Yes, she was a scout, but she was a leader of expeditions. She, in my mind, was just an extraordinary hero. So, you know, here is one of the last pictures of Tubman. We know that this small 5-foot-tall woman suffered from this traumatic brain injury. She could neither read nor write. She had no formal education, but she was a bold woman of action. She was a military leader who trusted first and foremost in God. She also deeply understood the failings of human nature and the depth of evil that was required to enslave another person. She, in her being, was the antithesis of the definition of a leader on every level, and she led anyway. Even though she was denied the gift of literacy and education, she outsmarted her would-be captors at every turn. Because she was born in Maryland, Maryland remained a state that honored slavery throughout the Civil War. It meant that she risked recapture the entire time that she was doing this work. She did not officially receive her freedom until just before the Emancipation Proclamation, when Maryland ended slavery a few months before the proclamation itself. This is the woman, Moses, who delivered hundreds in her time, and I believe she can liberate us today. If we make hope and determination the anchors of our soul, we can follow in Tubman's path. I want to close with this image. I'm just so delighted that we found this new image for the new century. You know, dignity is a gift that we can give to ourselves as well as to one another. And what I see Tubman giving is not only dignity, but courage. When you lost your courage, she was able to give it to you. You know, they use words such as cunning and clever rather than tactical and strategic. But for the 21st century, I hope we move beyond the homespun woman towards a fuller understanding of her complex leadership and her extraordinary capacity. In the case it didn't happen in her lifetime, I want to offer and extend a posthumous thank you for your service on behalf of a grateful nation. Through her example, we know we can free ourselves. We know that we can move above and beyond what society has meant for us. We know that we should never give up. We know that she is the person who summoned and faced her deepest fear, and she led anyway. We know that she trusted herself, she trusted God, and in between those two abilities, she was able to conquer and accomplish very extraordinary things. So thank you for inviting me to help celebrate this bicentennial year of Harriet Tubman. It's been a great honor.
Wow. Dr. LaRoche, you absolutely brought this woman to life in a way that is inspiring. And we have 250 people who are tuned in who have questions. And so I'm going to try to scatter them quickly to you. And you were so gracious to give us time for questions. There were several questions about the raid where she freed 750 people, which, as you talked it through, was in 1863. Where did those people go?
Many of them, many of the men did what the raid was set out to do. I think about 150 of them joined the United States Colored Troops. Several of them settled in that region so that there are Black communities there where they settled. And so most of them stayed right there, either went into the US Colored Troops or settled nearby.
And, you know, you spoke about her work with the colored troops, the South Carolina volunteers. And can you tell us a little bit more about Montgomery?
Well, you know, if you've heard that term, bleeding Kansas, Montgomery is one of the mainstays, and he is fighting to make sure that Kansas does not come into the Union as a slaveholding state. So his reputation preceded him. He was a confidant with John Brown. He was a man of unorthodox military strategies and tactics. And so Montgomery was, in some cases, people were disapproved. Robert Gould Shaw disapproved of Montgomery's tactics of burning, destruction of property, and so forth and so on. But this was how Montgomery operated. And so he was, there was a lot of bravado, but Tubman knew that he was a man of action. Tubman knew that he was a man who would deliver, and she trusted him. And so she worked with him, not just on the Kumbi River raid, but she worked with him also in Jacksonville in Florida. So, you know, I think that Montgomery, I think they inspired one another. Their ultimate aim in life was to bring an end to slavery and, quote Malcolm X, by any means necessary. And so the two of them fit well together. And Hunter, David Hunter, who's also in this threesome, is also very dedicated to freedom for people who are held in slavery.
And so tell us a little more about how did Harriet Tubman get along with the white Union soldiers?
She's up in when she's in Fort Monroe, she's with Butler, and those are the white troops. And sometimes she is dismissed and ignored. Sometimes she is, people don't know who she is. At other times, she is, she's a woman who does what has to be done. So she's a very good judge of character. And so if people are starting to feel to her like they can't be trusted or are not trustworthy, she doesn't care who you are. She will keep her own counsel and then step back and sort of pay attention to what she's feeling about the people who are around her. So she's very much interested in what she thinks is the right thing to do. And so that's how we see her.
And tell us, you mentioned that last photograph was newly discovered.
Yes.
Tell us the story about that.
This was in a photo album in upstate New York that came up for sale. One of her friends had this in her photo album. And when it came up for auction, I mean, there's no question that it's Tubman. And it's just really impressive that we can find something this new, this late in life. When it first came up for auction, I think it ended up with the Library of Congress and maybe the National Museum of African American History coming in and owning it so that it's in the public domain. But it was inside of a larger photo album that was going up for auction, and that image came forward. She's in upstate New York. Part of the work that she does with women's suffrage and women's rights in upstate New York, and a lot of her abolitionist friends. So she has wide contacts across New York and across many of the not just Boston, but she's also upstate New York. And this was found in upstate New York.
Well, let's talk about upstate New York for a minute. A couple people asked, she worked in upstate New York. She was known to be a supporter of women's suffrage. Do we think she went to the first women's suffrage conference? Do we know?
I can't tell you specifically. I know she's up there, and I know she does attend many of the conferences. I cannot tell you definitively whether or not she's at the first one. I'm sure someone in the audience can probably tell you more, but she does definitely attend these conferences. She is very interested. She's very interested in women's rights. I mean, can you imagine? This is a woman who's been operating in a man's world since she was probably about 20. She found out in domestic slavery that, that these abusing women in the household were, she was struck more times as a young child than any other time in her life. So she really comes out of the domestic part of slavery and moves into, a man's world. But she also is very much interested in how women are treated, women's rights. She's interested in women's suffrage. And she is with them, particularly as she ages. She now becomes the hero. And so people are always turning to her. She really is sought after. But whether or not she's at the first convention, I cannot tell you.
Well, one of the questions is, as she became a hero and she became sought after, did she turn from being sort of a behind the scenes to a speaker? And do we have any, do those texts survive somewhere?
There are about 7 books on Tubman. So there are 2 great biographies, one by Catherine Clinton and one by Kate Clifford Larson. Those give you the contours of her life. But there's also Jean Humez's book about the life and stories of Tubman. And you can read in Humez's book, she has all of these original sources. Harriet Tubman, one of the reasons why the Transcendentalists and the folks in Boston are so interested in her is because of the stories that she tells. She not only has these great adventures, but she retells them in such an entertaining way that we know that Tubman is also a great storyteller. So what she's being sought after is A, for her storytelling ability, but even when they come back from the Kumbi River raid, they bring them back to church and they all come in and Tubman speaks. And apparently she is so inspiring at that talk and so eloquent that it is her words that inspire these hundreds of men, 150 men, to join the US colored troops at that time. When you read her words, she is humble, but she's also poetic. And I think that it's interesting to resolve the differences. A person who has little to no education, but great wisdom. And that is who she was. And so she commanded respect for the wisdom that she imparted. And she often did it in ways that were beautifully rendered. So yes, she was sought after as a speaker. And where she did not leave a written record, she very much left this report back from people who were with her, people are writing about her. And so she's always being written about, even when she can't basically write about herself. So yes.
And tell me, when she changed her name,
Yes.
what was the story about her changing her name, and
Well,
where did she come up with Harriet Tubman?
So we know that Nelson Davis is her second husband. So Harriet Tubman, her full name was Araminta Ross. That's the name she was born with. Her mother was Harriet Ross and her father was Ben Ross. When she marries and Tubman becomes her last name. But when most people escape from slavery, they often change their name because now you're looking for a different person. So this name change, it's a new life, it's a new name, it's a new name in freedom. So her mother's name was Harriet. So she took Harriet and her married name was Tubman. And so she became Harriet Tubman. So she moves, and this is when you're working in genealogical circles, this is the most maddening thing, because Araminta Ross, if you're over here looking for Araminta Ross and you don't realize that she's now changed her name to Harriet Tubman, it's a totally different person. So she comes in and she changes her name and she never looks back. And then when you look at the affidavit for her Civil War pension, you now see that they have to tell you it's Harriet Tubman because now she's Harriet Davis. So you have to, but she's most well known as Harriet Tubman, but we also know her as Araminta Ross and we know her as Harriet Tubman Davis.
Well, there's no question we could ask you questions all day.
Yes.
So I have about 2 or 3 more. So let me just warn you that we're almost going to let you off. You've just done such a fabulous job. But tell us, what do you know about the Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill? Are we going to get it? Would she like the image?
Well, when it first surfaced as a consideration, I was actually with her niece and Kate Larson, and they were going over to the Mint to look at the plates. I think the plates had been either fully engraved or partially engraved at that time. I'm not speaking officially because this was many, many years ago. I have not been privy to what is happening now. But I'll say this, and this is my own personal opinion. When you sort of live with Harriet Tubman, when you study Harriet Tubman, I am in the congressional record, I am reading all manner of historical accounts from about the American Revolution till the end of Reconstruction. there probably is no more heroic person, no more selfless person than I can think of in history. And certainly the grandiose people that we put on these dollar bills and $20, 30, 10, whatever it is, don't necessarily have the traits that we would want to see in an American patriot. And Tubman has them all. I think she should be on the $20 bill. And it would, the reason why it's the 20 is because it's a bill that's in high circulation. And it would be to this country's honor to finally recognize this woman at the level that she deserves.
I love it. We have so many more questions, but let me just give you the one that I think really sums, several people are like, how could it take so long to get that pension, and why did not other people help her?
But people did help her. That it was remember, she can't read and write. Right. Somebody's got to do all this for her. It's her friends who are supporting her those 30 years to get that pension.
And did Montgomery or Hunter or any of the other soldiers help her?
I don't see Montgomery or Hunter in the records are in the National Archives. I don't necessarily see them coming forward to support her in that way. But, all of the documents are coming in, you're seeing these documents that are coming forward. But that it's her friends, she's out of the war now. She's back up in Auburn. She's no longer with these Civil War people. She's back up in upstate New York. And so the push for the pension, and it's confusing because the government, she's a woman. And it's interesting that when she comes out of the war and when it's time for the pension, they give her the widow's pension. They increase the widow's pension, but they never honor her as a veteran of the Civil War. Here is this enslaved Black woman, and it is not how she was remembered for her pension. But if you read the document that I put up, they do talk about her service in the Civil War, and she was very gratified by that.
Now, we had a question about you, Dr. LaRoche. How, can you tell us briefly about your training as an archaeologist and how challenging it is to find the real stories of our African-American community? And how did you come to this? What do you do? How are you so wise?
And you read a lot. You're wise on everyone else's wisdom, and then you put it together in your own way. I came to this whole topic from the African burial ground. I'm actually an archaeological conservator. I work on artifacts. And while I was working on those artifacts, I was asked to do some work on the Underground Railroad. And one thing led to another, to another, to another. And I really began to realize that if I'm going to work on artifacts, I want to know who used them. I want to know how they were used. So I don't want to just stay with telling you what the material is. Oh, this is wool or this is metal. I wanted to understand the artifact in its sort of 360 full context. And that led me into history, led me into art. And it's just been archaeology in my mind, because of the difficulty in ascertaining the full nature of African-American history, and that much of the built environment, I'm in historic preservation now, much of the built environment has been allowed to fall down, be destroyed, burned. It's not there. And when you take something out of the environment, it doesn't exist anymore in our mind. And so to come back and resurrect these things from an archaeological perspective is to begin to reintroduce this history into the minds of the public and reintroduce this history into the textbooks and bring this history back to life. Once we find these things from an archaeological perspective, we can start to build a history on top of it, build it out, really begin to get a much deeper and greater meaning and understanding of what this history was, what it meant, and why, frankly, it no longer survives.
Dr. LaRoche, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing Harriet Tubman's story. Thank you, each of you, for tuning in with us. I know we couldn't answer every question, but what we'll do is when we send you the note that says the video is available, we will also include information about Dr. LaRoche's books. And so if you want to try to catch one of those books and read more, that's an opportunity. We also want to invite you to our upcoming programs. We have coming up on Thursday, the 17th of February, Portraits in Oversight, a project that we're doing together with Wayne State Law School's Levin Center, talking about the role that Elijah Cummings of blessed memory served in determined congressional oversight. And then we have one of our Capitol fellows who is going to talk about the wild world of Gilded Age Capitol tours on February 22nd. Did you know that the Capitol was a honeymoon destination during that time? And people came to a Capitol tour as part of their honeymoon. And then we have one of our very own alumni, Dr. Felicia Bell, is going to talk with us about enslaved labor in building the Capitol and the public memory of that. And we'll be joined by Senator Blanche Lincoln of Arkansas, who was at that time a member of the Senate and a leader in creating the authorization to have a monument that acknowledges the enslaved labor that built the Capitol in the Capitol Visitor Center. And for the next generation to know about the Capitol, we are kicking off our Capitol Kids series with Kitty Feldy, author of the Fina Mendoza Mysteries, talking about the State of the Union. And this one is for our young people and for classrooms. And we'll have an opportunity for kids and classrooms to ask questions. So we are so grateful to every one of you for being involved. I got some fascinating little texts. We had people on this from Texas, from the Philippines, from Akron, Ohio, from Atlanta, Georgia, and all of you, we appreciate you being involved. We appreciate you sharing this information. And we remind you that our work is only available because of the support of our members and friends. Somebody made sure I knew there was somebody here from Arizona. And we hope all of you will contribute and become members of the Capitol Historical Society and make your donations so that we can continue to make these programs possible. Dr. LaRoche, thank you, thank you, thank you. We are honored to have your words and have your wisdom. Be well. Have a good week.
Thank you.